You should welcome someone looking to see that if you've done what you think you're supposed to be doing to produce a safe product, you should welcome someone looking and inquiring and asking probing questions, because the result should be fine.
Hello, welcome to episode 3 of FDA Watch. I'm Wayne Pines. I've been involved with FDA for several decades. At one point, I was Associate Commissioner at the agency, and I've authored or edited about 16 books about the agency.
Welcome, and I'm Shelly Garg. I'm the managing partner and founder of Garg Law, a full-service FDA-focused law firm. I have been on the private side advising companies on regulatory compliance and enforcement for the last 15 years.
So hopefully you've subscribed to the podcast and have listened to the first 2 episodes. The first one was with Nikki Reeves and Brian Malkin, focused on pharmaceutical issues. The second one was with Neil O'Flaherty and John Sawyer, focused on medical devices. If you haven't had an opportunity to listen to them, just visit our website, fdawatch.net. I'm going to repeat that, fdawatch.net, or wherever you get your podcasts. Here's what to expect from FDA Watch. We'll have at least 2 episodes a month. We are independent, we're nonpartisan. We'll be a national forum for discussing the latest developments and trends and issues in 4 core areas: pharmaceuticals and biologics, medical devices and diagnostics, food and dietary supplements, and cosmetics and personal care products.
Thanks, Wayne. And of course, we'll also be discussing the overall direction of the agency, including what to expect from the new administration and what's going on with AI at the agency. If you subscribe, you'll also get bonus episodes when there's breaking news, and there should be and there should continue to be quite a bit of breaking news, right, Wayne?
I would guess so. We're in a transition period here. This is a very unusual time. It only happens once every 4 years, and there's going to be lots and lots of news that we're going to be dealing with. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on food issues. We have 2 great guests whom you'll meet in just a moment. But first, let's get to some headlines. From the Pharma desk, FDA has issued a final rule that sets up a system for drugs that are used for chronic diseases to be available without a prescription, just so long as certain conditions are met. It's a rather complex system. We'll have to see how it works. It requires consumers to certify that they know how to use the drugs. Again, it applies mainly to drugs that treat certain chronic diseases or conditions. We'll have to see whether any companies and pharmacies take advantage of this new process, but it is an innovation, and you should be aware of what might be coming down the pike. From the device desk, FDA has issued an FAQ of frequently asked questions on clinical decision support software functions. The FAQs are intended to help sponsors identify whether their CDS software may meet the definition of a medical device as described in the agency's final guidance. The FDA also updated the list of authorized artificial intelligence and machine learning enabled medical devices, totaling 1,016. The list is not a comprehensive resource of medical devices that incorporate AI or ML. The devices on this list have met the FDA's applicable pre-market requirements.
Thanks, Wayne. And now from the foods desk, FDA finalizes the term healthy as a nutrient content claim. Right before the holidays, FDA issued its final rule to update the definition of the nutrient content claim healthy, marking a very important step in fulfilling the FDA's nutrition priorities, which is part of a larger government approach to address the crisis of preventable diet-related chronic diseases in the U.S. The rule is intended to help ensure that consumers have access to more complete, accurate, and up-to-date nutrition information on food labels, and to help consumers find foods that are really the foundation of a healthy dietary pattern, and of course, to encourage the development of healthier foods. The updated criteria for the healthy claim are aligned with current nutrition science, the dietary guidelines for Americas, and the updated nutrition facts label, which requires the declaration of added sugars. The agency is also continuing to develop a healthy symbol that manufacturers could use to indicate that their food meets the healthy criteria. From the cosmetics desk, FDA proposes a rule to require standardized testing methods for detecting and identifying asbestos and talc. So, FDA announced a very long awaited proposed rule to establish and require standardized testing methods to detect and identify asbestos and talc containing cosmetic products. This is part of the FDA's work to fulfill the requirements of Section 3505 under MOCRA, which is the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act of 2022. The proposed rule would require manufacturers of talc containing cosmetic products to test for asbestos using an analytical approach that includes specific test methods. If the proposed rule is finalized, cosmetic products would be considered adulterated under the Federal Food Drug Cosmetic Act, which is very important, if manufacturers fail to operate in compliance with either the testing or record keeping requirements of the rule. Comments must be submitted by March 27th, 2025. Now, Wayne, let's meet our wonderful guests.
Well, joining us first today is Stuart Pape. I've known Stuart for more time than either of us would like to remember. I recall his very first days at FDA. We worked together at FDA. One thing I remember is that when he was executive assistant to the commissioner and he was announced that he was leaving, I was delegated by the commissioner and by others to persuade him to stay. I have to admit that I failed. And Stuart went on to the private sector. He went on to Patton Boggs. He's now with a senior partner and chair of the FDA Practice at Polsinelli. Welcome to FDA Watch, Stuart.
Thank you, Wayne. Happy to be here.
Also joining us today is Domenic Veneziano. Domenic is an independent FDA regulatory and strategic consultant and owner of Veneziano Consulting. And I've known Domenic over the years. He's a good friend. As a 24-year veteran of FDA and the U.S. Public Health Service, Domenic served as the Director of Import Operations in the FDA Office of Regulatory Affairs and had prominent roles in the oversight of FDA's National Import Operations Program. We are delighted to have you, Domenic. Welcome to FDA Watch.
Thank you, Shelly. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
So there's a lot to discuss on food issues. Let's begin with a threshold question. The nominee for FDA Commissioner is likely to be Dr. Marty Makary from Johns Hopkins. He's a surgeon. He's made statements about foods. So, Stuart, let me start with you. What should his priorities be, or whoever the commissioner is? It might not be him. He's got to go through a confirmation process. But what should the top priority be with regard to foods for an incoming administration and for a new commissioner?
Well, it's interesting, Wayne, that Dr. Makary appears to have more of an interest in food issues than most incoming commissioners have. And I think that's a good thing. The food programs at FDA need attention. They need attention from the senior leadership of the agency. They're chronically unfunded because they don't have material user fees like all of the other major programs at FDA. So it's a constant triage that food people are doing to balance priorities and try and make progress on a range of different things. It's one of the reasons why the food program is so routinely criticized. So I would like to see Dr. Makary take ownership of the food program, reinvigorate people's confidence and bravado in the food program, and take a leadership role so that FDA remains the preeminent food regulatory authority in the country. And the reason I frame it that way is there's lots of state action, and the states are jumping in when FDA is not, and that's not a good thing.
Domenic, same question.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Stuart on a lot of things. I think that he probably spoke with the proposed HHS secretary, Mr. Kennedy, and I think overall they're going to look at things that make the consumers more healthy. in terms of moving forward. They're going to look at additives. They're going to look at causes of impact to the consumers overall. And I think that's important. And I agree with Stuart. I think the food program has always been a little bit underfunded because of the decisions that FDA has made in the past as it relates to registration and getting those user fees where other centers have taken advantage of that aspect of it. And if the common saying is that USDA gets most of the funds, and they have 20% of the responsibilities, where FDA has 80% of the responsibilities. So I agree. I think part of that is looking at balancing the resources. But when I was with the agency, I dealt majority with operational issues, and I think one of the things he needs to focus on is the operational of aspect of the agency and how it's structured. They FDA just went through a restructuring, and a lot of that had to do with the issue with baby formula, but it expanded to every program, every center, and everything. Whether that's a good idea or not is left to be seen. But I think it puts a lot of onus and a lot of changes on how operations are handled moving forward. And I think on the import side of things, where I was focused, I think it could cause delays and cause an issue with day-to-day operations, because when you import stuff, it has to be real time. It cannot be a delay in the entire process.
Dominic, to follow up on that, I mean, do you think that that with the user fee, or with operational control, would FDA hopefully kind of develop some consistency within the agency? Because as we know, there's a lot of inconsistent enforcement of its regulations, particularly at the port and at the border. So my hope is that there is more of a streamlined pathway for businesses, for regulated industry to know how to operate, and with that is, of course, strengthening food safety. I think fully implementing FSMA, which it's been sort of a slow rollout. And then also, I'm curious to see how the agency in the food space will have oversight over emerging technologies, including cell cultured meat. Any thoughts on that, Dominic or Stuart?
Well, I think overall, operationally, I think there is. I think the agency has come a long way. I think they made a change on one of the structures they made is reducing 16 import districts down to 5, where there is now an associate commissioner of imports that oversees all of the field, where in the past there wasn't. So I think there are, and if people or the industry finds inconsistencies, I think they should bring them up to the agency to make those changes appropriately. I think that overall, one of the big things I would see in terms of consistency, though, Shelly, and one thing I would like to put across is that the agency doesn't do the way the structure is now and the decisions that are made. They don't always follow the correct procedures. And I think people have to challenge the agency. And that's what I'm hoping the administration change will allow. I think the agency got themselves in a position where they feel that they can make any decision they want, whether it's following procedures, not following procedures, or the regulations or the law. And I think people can't be afraid to challenge FDA when those decisions are made.
So let me turn back to sort of the challenges that I see for the commissioner. And back in early January, we saw an example of this. The agency, the head of the Human Food Program, Deputy Commissioner Jim Jones, reallocated money from programs that provide support to the states, funding to the states, to conduct inspections, in order to reallocate that money to his new baby, the reexamination of existing chemicals in the food supply, for which the agency sought but did not receive funding from Congress. And that provoked a not friendly letter from several Democratic senators saying, wait a minute now, the state and FDA funded inspections by the states is the front line of food safety protection. Why are you taking that money from there? So that's an example of sort of triage, and there are no winners in those examples. Somebody lost money, somebody else got money. There was no more incremental money.
What are the implications of states having less money for food inspections?
Well, fewer inspections. The states are dependent on the federal funding in order to have personnel available to do those inspections. Um, uh, One can debate, how important are inspections in ensuring the safety of the food supply. Um, I've often said the inspectors have to be around enough that a food facility fears that an inspector might show up, which is different from the inspector has to be there every day, every month, every 6 months, every year, every couple of years. If you're talking about FDA regulated facilities, every couple of years, I think, is the right sort of time frame to be thinking. That's a big risk, because as soon as you have a food safety episode that is related to something that went on in a facility, and it turns out that the state in which that facility is operated pulled back on inspections because it had fewer funds from FDA, that decision will blow up in the face of the deputy commissioner.
And I would agree with that. I think, I mean, the reason why states do inspection is because there's so many resources that are left to go around. FDA focuses on, the higher risk inspections, where they have 3 to 5 years to conduct inspections of high risk products, and 5 years for lower risk products. And they try to get there as much as they can. Obviously, they don't have the resources to do that. And what they rely on is doing audits of the state inspection. So, yeah, if you reduce the funds to the states, it's going to result in less inspections, and like, but potentially have a foodborne illness issue.
Talking about inspections, there has been a delayed rollout of FSMA, in part because of the pandemic, but really since the close of the pandemic, FSVP, Foreign Supplier Verification Program inspections, have significantly ramped up. And there have been multiple recalls recently. What are the implications of increased FSVP inspections and warning letters? And what are your thoughts on why there has been such an influx of recalls and particularly those types of inspections recently? Domenic, we'll start with you.
Well, as you know, FSVP is close to my heart. I was the architect of that. I wrote it, along with the staff in FDA and the attorneys. But I think overall, it was supposed to be um, um, something that was conducted routinely on at location. They moved it more to a remote inspection. I think that COVID did cause a little bit of a delay in terms of getting out there, but those numbers are increasing, and it always has been a high priority to make the importer more responsible of products that they're importing to ensure compliance, in meeting the requirements of the regulation. So yeah, we always knew it would increase. I think that's where they're going. I think it's going to continue to go up over time, and I think more action is going to be taken just because of the more experience. But I also think, Shelly, it's the lack of knowledge from the industry of how to prepare for an inspection, what to do during an inspection, when to say no to FDA and when not to say yes to FDA. So it's a really big balance, and it's something that you need to be very careful of, because what I've seen implemented isn't something that I would have agreed on when I was with the agency. I think it's a little unfair to the industry, and having been a consultant for almost 8 years now, I'm seeing and I'm dealing with companies that have made a mistake during that inspectional process, and it's almost causing them to go out of business, because it technically puts a ban on anything that they can import moving forward if they make the wrong mistake.
I want to turn for a second if I could, to recalls. You can't help but notice in the last several months an awful lot of recalls. Uh, are there really more food recalls, or are they just getting more visibility? Is food supply deteriorating from a quality standpoint? What's going on? I get a lot of questions like that from friends who say every week there seems to be some new recall.
Well, I think there are a couple of things going on, Wayne. I think one of the things that's going on is that there are more companies who are, in a sense, interrelated with others, so that when there's a recall that is driven by an ingredient, it turns out that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of companies that maybe knowingly and in some instances unknowingly had that ingredient in their product. So you see derivative recalls. So I think that's part of the problem. I think what some of us are starting to ask now about FSMA is whether we're seeing the benefits that was the promise and hope of FSMA. And I don't know that we can answer that question yet, because as Shelley noted, for lots of reasons, in part the complexity of the rulemakings that FSMA required, and the length of time it takes to get those rules done when you have hundreds and hundreds of comments from stakeholders, many of which are quite substantive and important and need to be sorted through and so forth. So I don't blame FDA for being slow to implement FSMA, but I think because some of those regs are only now coming into full force, FSVP is a perfectly good example of that. Whether FSMA will reach its promise remains an open question.
Yeah. Domenic, any other thoughts on that?
No, I think Stuart hit it pretty much on the head. I think I think the agency, the implementation or the rollout of regulations and final rules is very difficult. And as I think you recall, FDA was sued for the fact that they didn't get the rules out in the required time and lost that. So they were forced to get things out before they really wanted to. So they did that. I think it is hard, and I think the implementation or the laws can't prevent foodborne illnesses. The only one that really can are the manufacturers, to make sure that they're doing it right and being on site. The inspections are supposed to help that. They're supposed to go there and kind of put people on track to make sure that they are following those regulations, and hope that by implementing them correctly, that food safety is prominent during their process. Again, you can't be there 100% of the time because you just don't have the resources. So every time FDA goes out, it's a snapshot in time, that point of view, but you don't see what's going on otherwise. But in terms of the recalls, I agree with Stuart in terms of what you might be seeing and why the increase of it.
Let me ask you one question about from the standpoint of industry, of regulated industry. How is and how should regulated industry be reacting to the increased inspections, to the increased recalls in the importation world, some changes to the changes at FDA? Look at it from the perspective of regulated companies. What should they be doing, and what does it mean for them? Let me start with Domenic there.
So that's a great question, Wayne. Having come from obviously FDA and now on the supporting and having clients on the industry side, it's a little bit unique for us. You were with FDA, Stuart was with FDA, so now you're coming back from the industry point of view. I think they should welcome it. I mean, I think if they're prepared, and they're doing things the right way, I think they shouldn't be concerned with FDA coming out. It's a way to get a fresh pair of eyes on there and understand if there are gaps in your processes to identify them. I do think that you have to be careful of how you go about it, though, when you do get inspected by FDA, because you need to know what to provide them and what not to provide them. I could tell you, having been an investigator doing inspections, what my goal was during an inspection. It was understanding or the thought process of my child, my mother, my family member, my friend was either going to be on an operating table, eating that food, being part of whatever, and it was my job to protect them and to find problems with that firm. That was my goal going in. until I was proven otherwise. So what you give FDA or what you allow them to see makes it very difficult. But I think they shouldn't be concerned with, having an inspection. I think it should be welcomed, and it should be it should be a good look at their systems of testing it. And I think importing wise, again, I don't think the administration is going to cause any delay in the importation. I just think you need to know, what's going on and what the processes are, the procedures in order to be more efficient. I do think the agency can do a better job at um, following those procedures, because I don't think they realize inside the agency how much it costs the industry when they import something. Every delay, every hold, every examination costs thousands of dollars, or millions of dollars, depending upon how long that process takes to get it from being an exam to a release. And I think if they did, and they listened to the brokers and the importers, I think they get a better understanding of the process and what the impact is to not only the industry but the economy itself.
Stuart, again, same question, looking at it from the industry standpoint.
Well, I think you're likely to see more of the same from FDA, at least in the first, 2, 4, 6 months of the Trump administration. And I was amused at Domenic describing when he was going in to inspect the facility, he was looking for problems. And I think that's the right mentality for an inspector to have. But I don't think it means that a regulated entity should view the inspector as an adversary. And I think when companies do that, you precipitate an adversarial interaction or
Right,
relationship
absolutely.
with the agency when you shouldn't. You should welcome someone looking to see that if you've done what you think you're supposed to be doing to produce a safe product, you should welcome someone looking and inquiring and asking probing questions, because the result should be fine.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Wayne, in my experience, I think the FDA inspectors and investigators, it's relatively a collaborative, cooperative approach where they want to ensure that the firm is compliant and are willing to provide constructive feedback, but it's not where they're trying to write you up for a speeding ticket the minute that they get there. And so I think I agree with Stuart and Domenic that it should be well received, and there should be preparation taken into consideration. We're going to take a quick break right now, but don't go anywhere because we will be right back.
And we're back. We're talking about critical food regulatory issues with Stuart Pape and Domenic Veneziano. Let's start with you, Domenic. Could you tell our subscribers if there's any key regulatory issues rising to the surface that our subscribers should be concerned about when it comes to food importation?
In terms of importation, I think you're going to have I think the biggest one coming down the road is the traceability requirements under the Food Safety Modernization Act. It's going to come into effect in 2026, but you can't wait until 2026 to get that implemented. Obviously, it takes a little time to do that, and you have just over a year. I believe everything becomes compliant. You have to be compliant by January 20th of 2026. So I think that's the biggest one that's heading down the road in terms of regulatory requirements. And it's not really the import side of things, but it is related to imports because there's always that traceability aspect of it, one way or the other. So it's not going to impact imports in general, but it will impact, obviously, compliance of regulated products that has been identified. Especially one of the things that happened during the FSMA, as we looked at FSMA, was identifying high-risk products. And the food traceability list kind of identifies that for you. That list provides which ones require additional record keeping aspects and traceability from the manufacturers all the way down to the people that are receiving it. So I think that's the one that's going to be the biggest one coming down the road.
One question for Stuart, and that has to do with the reorganization of the human foods program. FDA described it as a usually major reorganization, a lot of moving around of functions and of boxes. In your view, can this reorganization really achieve any of the goals that it's set without, either with or without additional resources? There aren't going to be any more resources. We have to believe that. How do you see this reorganization affecting the regulatory framework?
Well, I have modest expectations for the reorganization. I do think that in large complex organizations like FDA and like its various food programs, structure can operate as impediments to efficiency and communication and therefore outcome. And so, to the extent that the reorganization I think this remains an open question, but to the extent that the reorganization has more sensible structure, better aligns people in organizational places so that they can apply themselves with colleagues against objectives, that's a good thing. But the fundamental problem that the food programs have is they're under resourced, and so um, um, having more nurses in the emergency room who are focused on cardiac problems still doesn't mean you're not doing triage and having to sort out which of those problems get attention and which ones don't. And that is something FDA people in the foods program do every minute of every day. And there's only so much time that you can work against the project, and if it goes nowhere, then after a while you say, why the heck are we working on this? Because we thought it would take us 2 years. We're now in the third year and we're still not anywhere close to getting it done. And then managers reallocate priorities. Look at the food ingredient programs. There are um, chemicals that FDA has announced that it's going to take another look at, or it's going to make a decision soon about the status of something, and then decades, and I'm not exaggerating, decades go by. FDA said in 1999 it was going to look at the listing of color additive red number 3 for use in foods. And 2024 ended without FDA having made a decision. So, that's just one of any number of examples we could give of inability of the program to achieve many of its goals, even when it commits itself to reaching a goal.
Yeah, and let me just add a little bit to that. I think overall, the change of the structure and the operational changes could impact it. I mean, I'm a little old school, so I was around when it was the Office of Regulatory Affairs and not the Office of Inspections and Investigations. But there was a separation of work. There was the policy, which the centers owned. So the Food Safety and Nutrition, Applied Nutrition, that center had developed the policies. They worked with the industry. They communicated with the industry, but they didn't have the oversight in terms of enforcement. That they took the compliance officers from the field, moved them over to the centers, and now not only are they setting policy, but and working with industry, but now they're also enforcing industry. So it's kind of being the lawmaker and the judge at the same time, which can complicate things. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. As Stuart said, it'll be we still have to wait down the road to see how effective it is. But I think making changes just to make change doesn't make any sense with doing it. And again, all of this was precipitated by one mistake that was made by somebody out in the field that changed the whole dynamic of the agency, whether it was good or bad. But you shouldn't be changing. You needed to look at overall and what the impacts are and seeing how it works out, rather than, I think, just making a changing everything just to say that you did something and go to Congress and saying you made a change.
Stuart, are you optimistic that the reorganization would would or will help expedite FDA's decision making, with color additive reviews and other decisions more timely, or is that a wait and see?
I think if I'm being charitable, Shelly, it's a wait and see.
Yeah.
I see. I think the the reorg has little to do with the pace of decisions on things like color additives and food ingredients. That's really that's a management and a resource issue. The management issue is someone needs to have a list, and so when FDA said in 1999 we're gonna make a decision on this, that needs to be on somebody's list, and either don't say that or put it on a list and make sure that in a reasonable period of time, what might be reasonable, 4 or 5 years to me would be reasonable if you address that, because this is where FDA really needs small p political help. It doesn't do a very good job of perceiving how of looking out into the future and saying what's it going to look like in 2024 when we haven't acted on something we said we were going to do in 1999. So on Red 3, in 1999, the provisional listing for certain uses of Red 3, what the agency did then was it declined to extend the provisional list. But the food uses had been permanently listed. So that means you have to go through formal rulemaking to change that. So the resource burden as between the action that was taken in 99 and the action which hadn't occurred through the end of 2024 is enormously different. But if you say you're going to do that, there has to be someone sitting somewhere in FDA that says, that's on my list, and I'm not going to let that go on forever. Because what happens then is what? California then says, well, geez, FDA, if you're not ever going to get around to doing this, we are going to protect the citizens of California. And then consumer groups wind up filing a citizen petition, sometimes a lawsuit. And even if you get around to doing something you said you were going to do, it looks like you were forced, bludgeoned into doing it. And
Yeah.
that's not a good look anywhere. And that just undermines confidence across.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We have time for one more question. And I just want to go back to food safety. As we saw during the pandemic, supply chain issues can really spike at any time. I want to ask both of you, with increasing, global food supply reliance, what are your thoughts on FDA's outreach and partnering with global regulatory bodies to really harmonize food safety standards, mitigate risks from global supply chain disruptions, including collaborating with foreign governments and strengthening border inspections? Dominic, we'll begin with you.
But I think it's important. I think they've always done that. The agency has done that in the past. I think they have collaborated with other federal agencies, foreign agencies. There's a number of things that they have. They have trilaterals that they work with Canada and Mexico and other programs where they do talk about that stuff. And there's a lot of RMAs, mutual agreements, regulatory mutual agreements that they're imposing, whether it be on devices or other programs. But I think they can do that probably a little better on foods. And to go about the speed that Stuart was talking about and getting it done, I mean, I think that's where a lot of the collaboration could occur, where they're looking at types of additives that are added, looking at the safety information that people have in country. And that's what was supposed to happen several years ago, where we not only take, or the agency doesn't only take the data that they have, but they utilize the data from other countries, from the industry, and they make better decisions and quicker decisions to get things done. So I think absolutely, in terms of food safety, there can be a lot more collaboration with the industry as well as with foreign government to make it a global aspect, all in terms of food safety, Sean.
Yeah, sure. So one of the pillars of FSMA is enhanced collaboration between FDA and its foreign counterparts. And in order to leverage the resources around the world, because no regulatory agency has resources to inspect or address every problem with products. One of the things I worry about actually with the incoming Trump administration is that their attitudes towards allies and international organizations like WHO and Codex and the like might make that harder, not easier.
Yeah, I agree.
So we're going to turn briefly to our resource link segment, which we do at the end of every one of our podcasts. We provide you with some valuable links that you might want to check out. Shelly, let's share them with our audience right now.
Will do, but I want to first point out that these links will be included on our website, fdawatch.net, so there's no need to write anything down.
Let's look first at our Pharma resource link. It's about the approval by FDA of the first generic once-daily GLP-1 injection to lower blood sugar in patients with type 2 diabetes. Obviously, diabetes is a chronic problem that affects millions of Americans. You might want to check out that link, which refers to the FDA press release. GLP-1 products have been front page news for a long time because of their other uses. Let's move on to medical devices. One resource link here is an article from an excellent publication, MedTeach Dive. The headline says that the headline says few medical devices are designed for children, and FDA Children's National Collaboration aims to change that. And that's an article that everybody who's interested in medical devices or in children should be reading.
Moving on to our food resource link, it's an FDA press release about healthy claims, which we talked about earlier in the show, and it's titled FDA Updates Healthy Claim, Providing a Refreshed Tool for Consumers. We'll definitely be covering this on future FDA Watch episodes. Finally, the cosmetic resource link. Again, it's the proposed rule requiring standard testing methods for detecting asbestos in talc-containing cosmetic products. This is extremely important for cosmetic businesses and something we'll cover in our next episode. And on that note, Wayne, it is time to thank Stuart Pape and Domenic Veneziano for being really such incredible, insightful guests in this episode. Thank you, Domenic and Stuart, for your time. We'd also like to thank our podcast creator and executive producer, Michael Levin-Epstein, and our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister.
And Shelly, let me remind everybody, if anybody wants to suggest a guest or be a guest on our show, or want to be a marketing partner or a sponsor, or just comment on the show, you can contact us at info@fdawatch.net. I'll repeat that. info at fdawatch.net. And certainly check out that website again for the third time, fdawatch.net. Finally, we'd appreciate it if you're so inclined to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. It really does make a difference. And remember to follow us and to subscribe. That's the only way to make sure you won't miss a single episode of FDA Watch.
And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.